COVID has brought us many, many challenges, but the one I want to address tonight is a very serious challenge that we've seen from COVID. In fact, the CDC itself did a study about halfway through the COVID crisis back in June of last summer, showing that the average American, 40%, just over 40% of the average Americans have experienced stress and challenges to their mental health. Mental health is something that has been gravely challenged by this crisis, and we're seeing record amounts of suicide ideation, that is thinking about suicide, anxiety disorder, depression. It's been as epidemic as the virus, really, as the COVID virus. And so we want to tackle this project and this problem here at the Augustine Institute. We've heard from many of you. I've heard letters of those of you who say, I'm struggling with depression right now. I've kind of been locked at home. My husband and I, we haven't gotten out since the COVID virus hit. Well, we've been listening to you and we want to help you. And so one of the things we want to do is address this. And to do that, there's an exciting new program that we've just today put on the Form platform called The Sanctuary. It's 8 episodes that go through different mental health issues and challenges and how we can address it. One of the key consultants and leaders of that project is with us this evening, and I'm very excited to have her with us. And we're going to address the issues of COVID and mental health. Welcome back. You know, it's really exciting for me to share this topic with you, especially with the special guests we have. As I mentioned before, there's a special new program that we have on Form, just launched today on the Form platform, called The Sanctuary. And it seeks to create a sanctuary of information and help and assistance for people with mental health challenges. And, 1 out of 5 Americans, according to studies, has a mental health challenge. And so almost all of us know somebody who is challenged in some area of mental health. And studies show that probably 50% of Americans will at some time during their life struggle with some aspect of mental health. And so this is something that it's important for us to get our minds around and our hearts around and be able to address and talk about. And to do that, I'm really excited to have a good friend and a very special guest, Dr. Lillian Hendricks, who has her doctoral studies were in clinical psychology. She's a clinical psychologist, has a private practice. And what I love about Lillian's background is that she has both theology and philosophy in her background, but with clinical psychology, her goal and her aim is to look at the whole person from a Catholic perspective. So Lillian, it's really a joy to have you on the show and to really talk about this new program. And I want to just start off with, tell our audience, what is the Sanctuary Project? What is this program?
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, I'd love to talk about it, and I'm so excited that it's now available. So it's called the Sanctuary Course for Catholics, and it was created by Sanctuary Mental Health Ministries, a nonprofit in Vancouver, Canada. And there's another course that isn't explicitly Catholic that this Catholic version is based on. And Sanctuary formed a couple years ago about putting this course on Formed. And at that point, I was asked to take a look at it and see if it seemed like a good fit for Formed. And I was very impressed. It's beautifully done and very rich, wonderful resource. But then in conversation with Dan Whitehead, the head of Sanctuary, we decided that tailoring it for Catholics, it could be even more effective, because it's such an important issue that we want Catholics to just feel very comfortable, and so that this particularly Catholic version is really integrated with our faith, more so than the other version, which is beautifully Christian. But this tool, we're hoping, is going to just be very effective. One
of the things that I think you suggested to Daniel Whitehead and what you included in this new Catholic version of the Sanctuary that I was excited is you have clergy, you have priests, you have even bishops, but you also have a lot of healthcare experts,
yes,
in mental health. And then I think one of the striking things, and you can speak to this, each episode takes a witness, a testimony of somebody who struggled themselves with some aspect of mental health. Talk about how that formula came about.
So yes, they had Sanctuary design the course, 8 sessions, and each one has a person with lived experience of mental health challenges and a particular focus for that particular session. And then interspersed throughout are therapists, theologians, as you said, Archbishop Aquila from this diocese, and a bishop in Canada, and so it's just very rich. There are clinicians from Divine Mercy University, and just a variety of people from different cultures and backgrounds, all Catholics with their lived experience. So I think, the whole idea came out from Sanctuary, and then we just kind of pulled individuals from our Catholic community in the United States and abroad in order to participate.
That's so exciting. And talk about some of the topics that Sanctuary addresses for people. What are some of the topics?
Well, the whole idea is education. It's education around mental health. It's trying to get a conversation going and trying to get it going in small groups, in parishes. Would be a great parish-based study, either online or in person.
Yeah, let me just stop you there, because people could watch this as individuals on the Forum platform, but they could also get a group going in their parish to get a conversation and to help spread information. There's so many people wounded and hurting in this area, and people say, well, the church doesn't do enough to address this and resource this, but here's a resource for people to start a small group in their own parish, whether virtually or in person, right?
Yes, so equipping anybody who kind of has the capacity just to lead a group. You don't have to be a mental health professional at all. You can do it in your parish, you can do it with a group of friends. You do it with anybody, just to start a conversation. And you asked about what topics. So mental illness, stigma, self-care, then the community aspect, how we can find support in the community, recovery. These are all kind of lenses through which the broad topic is approached.
That's so important. One of the things I want to just say to everybody here is you're welcome to join us in this conversation. We love to have questions and your questions and comments. And so if you want to text a question to us, you can just dial 720-650-0100. And you can be part of the conversation always on our Augustine Institute Show. We love to have your participation and take your questions. Or you could leave a comment on the Forum platform and in the comment section. So we look forward to getting and receiving your questions and addressing that. Well, Lillian, one of the things you say here is you want to start a conversation with the Sanctuary. And I think that's so important because a lot of people feel a great stigma when it comes to mental health. If people have physical ailments, they have no problem going to a doctor or seeking help if they have trouble with their eye or if their knee is bad. But when it comes to mental health, people tend to have a stigma, and then that leads to not addressing the problem or silence. Is stigma a problem when it comes to mental health?
Absolutely. There's this unnecessary sense of shame in that I shouldn't have this, or something's wrong with me, and that it's not something that I can talk about. But that silence exacerbates the problem, because what you really need to do in a safe environment is to express and to get the support that you need. And we know, through our Catholic faith and through reason, that we're relational. We're not meant to be an island. We're meant to depend on one another, and we all have different gifts in the body of Christ, and we're not called to be our own doctor all the time. So I think kind of normalizing the fact that the Course also talks about a continuum of health. And yes, there are extremes on one end or the other, but all of us are kind of somewhere on this continuum in different stages of our life with regard to our mental health. And yes, there are incidences of serious mental illness that some people are more prone to biologically or because of extreme circumstances or trauma. But for the most part, everyone, goes through phases of what might be called healthier mental health or better mental health, and when you're under more stress or pressure. So I think it's something that's really important that we acknowledge and we see as part of our humanity and part of our fallen nature, as we are in this world right now, before we're in the kingdom of perfection.
So what you're saying is that, Catholics should look at it as just like it's natural to have problems with your knees or your eyes, and you want to address that, and you want to find help for that. That, having challenges, whether it's with anxiety or depression or other areas in mental health, that we should feel that, all right, it's natural to struggle and to seek help. And that one of the worst things we could do is isolate.
That's right. That's right. And just to be vulnerable, and I mean, it's important as a church that we can help create that sense of safety in which people can share with one another and share in a community, and not feel that they have to hide or that they're ashamed or that there's something morally wrong with them. And that's something we're can be particularly susceptible as Catholics, is to kind of to interpret things as moral that might be psychological.
That's an important distinction.
And think that, because I'm having these bad thoughts, someone who's obsessive compulsive or someone who is scrupulous, someone who struggles with those things, they might think, oh, these thoughts are coming, that makes me bad. Whereas no, the thoughts are coming. The question is what I do with that thought, or the thoughts are coming. How do I need to be equipped in order to deal with them?
Well, one of the things I think that the sanctuary is going to help Catholics do is to educate on this, because exactly this point you mentioned, for a lot of people, they don't realize, and we've learned a lot more about the mind over the last 30 years. But the mind is a complex organ of the body, right? And how the brain works.
Yeah.
And that, the thoughts that we have, that we're not responsible for having a thought, but what we do with it, right? Nurturing, and then if we, why don't you explain that to people, that distinction that you were just making? Because for a lot of people, they think, well, gosh, if I keep having these thoughts, that's me. And it's what you do with it, right? There's an important distinction to make.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you were talking about like knowledge of the mind and the brain. And I like to actually see a distinction between the mind and the brain. The brain is that natural organ.
Yeah.
We as creatures in the image and likeness of God are more than our body, right? More than that organ, more than our nervous system. We have our mind, our heart, our will. And so our mind generates a lot of thoughts. Some of them very helpful, of course, but some of them are not that helpful. A lot of it's based on our past experiences, maybe trauma, impressions that were left. And so in that case, the brain's trying to protect us, and it can become overprotective. And so it can kind of send thoughts that are extreme and excessive and can be kind of be debilitating, because they're just trying to get your attention to be on guard. Whereas in this new situation, you don't need to be on guard. So yes, so what do we need to do? We need to learn to filter those thoughts. We can do that through talking to other people, and kind of checking our perception of truth or what our brain is telling us, obviously through talking to a professional if we want to, if we need to. But ultimately, what's beautiful is that God made us with this mind and this heart and this freedom. And so we can, in that sense, not easily override our brain, but kind of guide it. And through entertaining the unhealthy, unhelpful thoughts, the brain kind of gets more control over us. Through filtering them and checking them with what we know is healthy and good and beautiful and true, they have less power over us. So that this bodily part of us isn't taking control. It's our whole person, in light of who we are as God's creatures, that is then kind of managing our person and helping us to be more who we are as persons.
That's so helpful. And I see we have our first question coming in here from Linda, and she asks, how do we remain hopeful and happy and optimistic during the time of COVID? I think COVID's created a lot of isolation for people and a lot of anxiety. So how do people remain hopeful and optimistic during these challenges of COVID?
So yeah, hope is a theological virtue. And of course, I'm sure, we're all praying and hoping for an increase in that virtue, asking for the grace, receiving the sacraments and all of that. But one thing to remember is that grace builds on nature. And St. Thomas Aquinas provided us with that maxim, and that so God can work in our lives more to the degree that the soil of our humanity is fertile. And so that, there's some natural means to do that. And one mean is to stay in community, to reach out to other people, to maybe make a regular phone call with someone who you're close to think of ways you can reach out to other people that might be isolated, because we're, just as we're in the image of God, we fulfill ourselves through a gift of self to others. And so come up with something creative, write to the imprisoned, or make calls to the homebound through your parish. Just some kind of initiative like that can actually engender your own hope. On a natural level, just to kind of support ourselves naturally so that, again, we can be more open to that grace. Taking care of your body, getting out, getting sunshine as much as possible, exercise as much as possible, diet, all of the things that we all know, but it's hard.
And just hearing you say, the first thing is don't be isolated. And of course, COVID isolates us physically, but you mentioned calling people or doing a Zoom or a Skype.
Yes.
Reaching out to people, make sure that you don't become isolated and closed in on self. That's a really important thing. And then the idea of not being turned in on self. Pope Francis always talks about how the danger of sin is that we turn in on ourselves, and being focused on others and their needs and serving and helping others and their needs is a great thing. And earlier, Lillian, you made the point about how important it is to regulate and reflect on our thoughts and to try to control that. There's a sociologist, psychologist who I really like called Roy Baumeister. He has a recent book called The Power of Bad. And that bad news has like a 3 to 4-fold way of getting more attention than good news. If you have good news and bad news of equal weight, we focus on the bad news. If you lost $100 and you won and you earned $100, you spend 3 to 4 times more time thinking about, I just lost $100, even though it's a net neutral, right? And so I think part of too for COVID is people getting focused on bad news. I mean, there's so much bad news out there. If you just focus on the bad news, you could, it just leads to more negative thoughts, which leads to more anxiety, which leads to more depression. So in our Catholic faith, what are some of the positive things that we could do practice-wise as Catholics, in Catholic spirituality that could help us focus on the positive?
I mean, one thing we can do is just limit our access to news and our exposure to news, and I think that's an obvious thing as well, but it's hard to do. But that constant exposure to the news does increase depression. So just kind of keeping in mind, is this helping me? Is this healthy? Nurturing the virtue of gratitude. It's shown by empirical evidence to have tremendous health effects, psychologically and even physically. And being very intentional about that, honoring, our intellect and that spiritual nature of ourselves to say, what do I have? Making a list, even starting a physical list, jotting it down here or there.
I love that. St. Ignatius of Loyola would have us begin our personal examination of conscience with gratitude, with what we were thankful for, all the blessings and graces received by God in the previous day. And I know I've taken that as a custom for myself in my morning prayer. First thing I do is I write down, 5 to 10 things I'm grateful for from the day before. And that positive mindset and that gratitude really helps us focus on things. But here's an important question that I think a lot of people have these days. And I mentioned earlier that so many people have been contemplating or thinking of suicide more than any other year, that seems like on record. So Lorraine asks, how do we understand suicide in our Catholic faith in combination with mental illness?
Okay, yeah, good question, Lorraine, because I think there's been so much misunderstanding about this over the years, and just this false impression that if someone commits suicide that they are condemned, that's the end of the story. And I think you could probably answer this question as well as I could, Tim, as a theologian. But the very simple answer is look at the nature of sin. For there to be sin, for there to be a mortal sin, there has to be grave matter, something very grave. And yes, taking of one's life is grave matter. But there also has to be understanding and consent of the will. So there has to be full understanding of what you're doing. I know what this is. I know this is grave. I know that this is separating me from God if I choose this. and I'm free to make this choice. I'm freely making this choice. I want to do something that I know is going to separate me from God. And when mental illness becomes a factor, that knowledge is obscured and that freedom is impeded.
That's so important for people to know. And I know for people who've had a loved one, maybe it's I just got an email this morning from a good friend, and his wife's brother just committed suicide, and struggled with depression for a long time, and then addictions. And so people wonder, are they saved? Is this such bad news that is their salvation is at stake? And what you said, Lillian, is so important, that there's 3 conditions for a sin to be a serious sin. It has to be a serious subject matter. The matter has to be serious. And of course, suicide it's life and death. That is serious. But like you said, we have to have free consent, and we have to have knowledge of what we're doing. And we have to know that it's serious, and knowing and freely consenting. And I think what you bring out and what we know now so much, there's chemical imbalances in the brain that affect people's thinking and their freedom in certain areas. There's addiction, there's depression, there's all these factors. And so what the church says is that the church can't make a decision on anybody who's committed suicide on their salvation. Only God knows the state. And I think for those who, the church warns, for those who don't have those impediments, we want to say suicide's not an option, right? It is a serious sin. So people, if they're just struggling and suffering in life, you can't do this. But for people who struggle with serious afflictions, mental illness, mental health, we don't know what the circumstances are, and God is merciful and He's just. And that's so important for people to know. So it's not the church is clear that, suicide, we don't know. God
That's
knows.
right.
And
Only
we have
God
to pray
knows.
for these people.
Yeah, only God knows. And even if there is someone that does know in general, there could be a particular moment or a particular state of vulnerability that they're in when they make that choice and they act on it.
Yep.
And that's only for God to really know that degree of knowledge and freedom.
Yeah. Well, and here's another question that comes in. Joe asks, self-awareness is always a great first step in all your work. What do you think are the top Catholic practices that help us get out of reoccurring cycles of pain?
So, yeah, self-awareness is so important. And Tim, you already mentioned the examine, and that's one of the main ones that comes to mind. This beautiful practice of reflecting with God, kind of on a regular basis, if possible. And that gratitude, and then kind of looking with God in His mercy at the day, where I've been open to the graces and where I haven't. I think that's a great one. I think encountering Scripture is always wonderful, and God can speak to you through that. I think for different people, different practices could be more fruitful. Like we're talking about the brain, everybody's a little bit different. Everybody's neurons are firing in different way, or some people are more distracted, some people are able to be more contemplative. And so you have to find that practice that is helpful for you. The rosary may be really wonderful and effective for some people. It might be harder for other people.
You're so right. I mean, I know people who they're a bit ADHD, and they can't sit still and pray, but they can walk and pray a rosary, and it's like a contemplative experience. But if they try to do that sitting for that long, it would be very hard. And so I'm a big believer that prayer and meditation are a great resource to strengthen our mental health. Right? I'm a big believer in that.
And finding what works for you, because not beating yourself up because I get
One
distracted during the
style
rosary.
Doesn't fit you.
Right. Just kind of searching for what really unites you to God, what gives you that capacity for reflection. And I also just want to throw in there, we talked about gratitude. I want to throw in there just cultivating virtue. And that is so important for self-awareness. And what is within my control? Okay, COVID's not in my control. The political situation isn't in control. What's going on with my kids may not be in my control to a great degree. But my growth in virtue, that is in my control. And so how can I practice gratitude? How can I practice forgiveness? How can I practice courage? And I know there's another question coming, but just on this courage, I think that's a wonderful virtue for us all to cultivate and practice right now in the face of real threats. You mentioned that especially with COVID, I think of anxiety, and I think of our Lord and the disciples full of terror,
and they're in the boat in the storm, and they're focused on the wind and the waves and all their problems, and they're terrified. And they see Jesus walking on the water, and they're even more terrified. And then Jesus says to them, "Be not afraid, I am. Have no fear." Or he says, or take courage. So be not afraid, I am. Take courage. And so this idea of taking courage and not being afraid because who Jesus is. And that's where I think if we keep meditating, and our faith is such a resource to help still stress, to help calm us with anxiety, and that I think goes a long way to helping us strengthen our mental health. Well, and I love what you said about virtues, but here's another question. There's so many great questions I want to help people. Steve asks, how do we locate mental health professionals who practice in their profession in accordance with Catholic teaching? I mean, people want to find people like you, Lillian, who are deeply Catholic and have a great Catholic understanding of their faith, but also understand clinical psychology. How do people go about finding that? What are some recommendations for them?
So one resource is online. It's catholictherapists.com.
Great, catholictherapists.com.
Catholictherapists.com, and you just go and you put a zip code in, or a certain area, and they will show you who's available. Also, many Catholic charities around the country have mental health services, so that's a great place to start as well. And I will mention, depending on what the issue is, if there's like a serious obsessive compulsive disorder or depression or anxiety, and it really just has to do with learning how to manage those thoughts, and your faith is strong enough, I wouldn't necessarily shy away from finding who is available to help you, and have the discernment. If this is something that's going to threaten my faith, okay, I'll keep searching. But this is also a human science, right? And God has given us gifts to all people to help one another. And so I wouldn't just outright say I only have to go with a Catholic. In some cases, I think it's more valuable and necessary than others with regard to mental health.
I want to thank that questioner because, and you mentioned we need virtues, and one of the virtues I think we need for those who really need to find help here is humility, and that's how we overcome stigma, because we all suffer with pride, and that's one of the 7 deadly sins, and it's the sin of the devil, and we just have to ask for help. We can't be afraid to ask for help or to tell people that we're struggling. Just even if they can't help us, to share. Like you said before, we're so relational. To be able to share. I'm really struggling with depression or anxiety right now.
Yeah.
And right now we're in unprecedented times, socially, politically, economically, globally. And so people need to be able to share that and reach out. And I'm so happy. I want to just wrap up now and just say thank you for coming this evening, but also shedding a light on the Sanctuary Project, because I think the Sanctuary is going to be a great program to help people. And so I just encourage all of you out there, if you know people who are struggling, share form.org with them, share the Sanctuary. Maybe you get a group of people, maybe you know a relative or a family member, and say, look, I'm going to watch this program with you to help them, to help share that burden, help share and lift that stigma. That would be a great thing to do, a great resource. And so I want to really encourage you to use the Form platform to do that. I also want to thank everybody who supports us in the Mission Circle. It allows us to put programs like the Sanctuary and get it out to many people. I hope that many, many parishes will adopt the Sanctuary program and use that as a study group. And that would be a blessing to many. And so all of you who support us monthly in our Mission Circle, I just want to thank you. You're helping us to reach and help other people, other Catholics all over the world. This is such a big issue, this challenge of mental health, that we're going to have our next episode next week. I'm going to have somebody the founder of jack.org, and he lost his son to suicide. And he started an incredible work up in Canada to help youths find the warning signs to suicide so that they can have peer-to-peer help so that we can save more lives. And so we're going to talk about youth risks for mental health next week. I hope you can join us, and I hope this has been a blessing to you. Thank you so much, and God bless.